The hour having arrived, I will call a meeting of the House Ag Finance and Policy Committee to order. Thank you all for coming today. And since this is our first really official meeting of the new session, custom is that we go around the table and let each other know your background, how you're connected to agriculture. Always like to hear that. And so members and staff, get ready to keep your comments under 5 minutes, okay? I just say that as a joke. We have an agenda, a full agenda. So again, welcome everybody. Welcome to our guests as well. And let's start with Luke down there on the far end. Name, background, where you're from, and your education.
Hello, my name is Luke LeBron. I'm the House GOP Ag researcher. I'm from Pine City, Minnesota, like a couple other members here. And my background, my major was history.
Hello, I'm Representative Nathan Nelson. I serve 11B, which is Pine, Kanabec, and parts of Chisago counties. And myself, I farm. That's what I say is my real job. I've got a cow-calf, and then I row crop and hay. So I'm glad to be here and glad to have several constituents on the Ag Committee.
Hi, my name is Representative Steve Jacob, and just start my second term here. Represent House District 20B, kind of between Rochester and Winona, so Wabasha County, Olmsted County, Goodhue County, and my hometown of Winona County. I'm currently still farming, fourth generation family farmer. Prior to being elected to the House of Representatives, I served 10 years on the Winona County Board of Commissioners, where I served on just as many water resource boards as I could serve on during that time. So I've got a rich history in taking care of the environment, and just looking forward to getting to work here for our agricultural community. Thank you.
Thanks, Representative. Our two freshmen have arrived. We're doing introductions, Representative Gander and Lawrence. Keep it brief, background, and how you're connected to agriculture. Go ahead, Representative Gander.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my name's Steve Gander. I serve in 1B, which is all of Polk County, Red Lake County, Norman County, a few townships in Clay County. A lot of agriculture up there, every kind of crop you can imagine. I've served in city politics as mayor for the last 8 years, close relationship with all the farmers and agribusiness up there. We have American Crystal Sugar, and Simplot has a good, strong presence up that way. So well connected. We have some farmland also up north of there in the family for deer hunting and other purposes. I love agriculture and want to help keep it strong. Really, I feel and always have said, for our area in particular, agriculture is our whole economic base. Everything comes off of that. We know that's how it works up there. And just so proud to be part of the legislature here again to strengthen agriculture in Minnesota. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Lawrence. I'm from House District 27B, which is the Princeton, Zimmerman, and St. Francis area, so just north of the Twin Cities here, about 50 miles. I've been privileged to grow up in a family farming business. We've got cattle we raise, as well as Kentucky bluegrass sod, and to my knowledge, I believe the Green Expo is going on down the street, which has a lot of agricultural products as well. But honored to be asked to be serving this committee. I have a chance to serve on local township board of the Township of Baldwin, which just recently became the city of Baldwin recently this past year, and 20 years serving in that area as well. And so married to my wife for 30 years, and just glad to be able to be elected as a state representative to represent our area and our state, as well as be placed on this committee. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Representative John Burkle. I represent Northwest Minnesota, District 1A, Roseau, Kitson, Marshall, Pennington counties. Fourth generation turkey farmer. We also have a cooperative turkey processing plant in Thief River Falls. I was chairman of the board there for 5 years, served on the board for 20. That's pretty much my ag background right there.
Staff members?
Chair and members, good afternoon. My name is Ken Savory. I'm the House Fiscal Analyst for the Agriculture Committee this year. I've served in the Ag Fiscal Analyst capacity since 2015 and the Higher Ed capacity since 2014. Thank you.
Chair members, I am Megan Mullenbeck. I'm the new House Research Analyst for Ag. I just graduated from law school at the University of Minnesota last spring.
My name is Connie Edwards, and I'm the CLA for this committee. I have no connection to agriculture, except that I was a longtime staffer for Senator Steve Dill. So if you're an older person, you might remember who that was.
Well, we all eat too. That's a good connection. Staff in the background,
I'm Jared Swanson, also with House Research. I primarily staff the tax committee. I will just be helping out on the for a little bit this year.
and a couple of pages back there, I believe. Introduce yourselves. Stand up.
Connor Buckles is my second year as a page. I might not be here permanently, but I'm here today.
Hi, my name is Shelby Yansky. I will likely be here permanently, but it's subject to change. Okay.
A lot of things subject to change this year, it seems like. My name is Rep. Paul Anderson. My ninth term starting here, I guess, and happy to be chairing the committee. Again, I chaired the policy committee a few years back. Rod Hamilton was on back then as well. And, we all are connected to agriculture, and it's just a privilege to be here on this committee. And we talk about ag as part of our state budget it's less than 0.5%, but the impact of our industry on the state of Minnesota and this country and this world is breathtaking and extremely important. So what we do is important, and this committee's work also is important, and welcome to all of you. And I should mention that Megan, who's been busy already drafting bills and such for us, is taking the place of Colby Sullivan. Colby has moved on to a different committee. We had Colby here for many, many years, along with Ken. So we welcome you, Megan, and appreciate the work you're doing for us, and will continue in that capacity.
My name is Mark Nicely. I'm the committee administrator for the committee, so I will be working with Chair Anderson in trying to do a smooth functioning of the committee and working with you all in advancing bills through the committee. I've lived here at the House for a little over 2 decades, and with all due deference to our first testifiers, I'm a proud graduate and animal science major of University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
And I am Representative Bobby Harder, representing 17B, which is the majorities of Sibley County and parts of Carver and McLeod. And my connection to agriculture is my husband and I, we are farmers, and we grow corn and soybeans. Last year was tough, just want everybody to know that. And prior to coming here, I served as a Sibley County Commissioner. Happy to be here. Thank you.
And Rep. Harder, by the way, is our vice chair of the committee. So thank you, Rep. Harder, Representative, and we will work well together. I didn't mention where I was from. I guess I'm 12A, which is out kind of west of St. Cloud all the way to the South Dakota border. Parts of Stearns County, most of Pope County, and then Swift, Stevens, and Big Stone counties. And I think I can say with safety that there probably are more turkeys and cattle in my district than there are people. So a strong ag area out in my part of the state, and just a good place to be. We have an agenda today, hopefully, that fills the time. We have had some we should say, issues with getting some of the departments to come to our committee meetings, not just this one, but other committees as well. Administration is, I guess, encouraging some of their people not to come to our committees, so we thank those that have come today, and we appreciate the work you're doing and the information you're sharing with us on the Ag Committee today. First up, we have some folks from the university. Welcome, and going to talk about the AGREE program and other parts that the university plays, extension and such also as well with agriculture in the state. So first up is Dean Burr. Recognize yourself and begin your testimony, Dean.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Members of the committee, I'm Brian Boer. I'm Dean of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences at the University of Minnesota. And as you mentioned, Chair Anderson, Dean Durgan with Extension is joining me, and Mitch Hunter is joining me with our Forever Green initiative. I'll pass this off to them for portions of this, if you'll entertain that. Thank you again. I'll spell out AGREE a bit for you. It's a name we throw around quite a bit, an acronym. It's Agricultural Research, Education, Extension, and Technology Transfer. The idea being, we take our research, we of course provide education to our students at the University of Minnesota in agriculture. It's a much better education than the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Apologies. And then we take that out into the field. So as we're thinking about agriculture development, our rural communities, this was an opportunity to take that research, assure through extension and through the work we do with extension, that this gets adapted into farm practices to benefit the state. So this is just a quick background to it of what it was initially as it was amended, and it was passed in 2015 originally, so this is about its 10th year now that it's been in place. It is to support productivity and agricultural growth through research, education, and extension, as I mentioned. And there were two priorities that we'll talk through today that were just the high-level priorities with it. And one of those is human infrastructure, which is basically the people who do the research and education, our faculty, our extension educators, and others who engage with us and come together to try to work on these challenging issues facing agriculture and bring new innovation and technologies and education to those programs. To give you a sense, there's also, I'll mention a little bit later, as part of a GREET, there's an advisory group of 23 members, I believe it is, who help from industry, from our partnerships in agriculture across from forestry to food systems to agricultural systems that work with us. And when we started out, we began a conversation about what are our areas for this. And not shown in this slide, one of our principles was this needs to do the most good for the broadest part of agriculture, that it's affecting across that board. So we didn't get ourselves into specific areas, but really thinking about what are those things that, whether you're a corn grower, you're in southern Minnesota, northern Minnesota, you're a livestock producer, that you have an opportunity to get research that would benefit your operations. And so this is a set of activities in here that we've stuck to pretty well. Of course, crop and livestock genetics and productivity is a key part of that. Microbial science research, which sounds odd, but that's these elements when you think about fertilizers and diseases, pests, those kinds of things that are part of agriculture and food systems. We look at a lot of how those interact. You think about good microorganisms in the soils and soil health, to organisms that are diseases and pest-based and affect livestock and crops. So that's just a key area that everybody has to address. Soil fertility, water quality, availability, all those issues are part of agriculture regardless of where you're at or what you're doing in agriculture. Nutrient cycling management gets to elements of course, fertilizers we're using in crop systems. We also have the issues of how do we address that with regard to cleaner water, water availability, and proper use and utilization of that, and optimizing that economically for farmers too, so that they're using the amounts that get the work done they need to have done to support their production. At the same time, it's not over-applying, which costs money as well. Certainly agroecological innovation, that comes a bit with our work, for example, in forest resources, that we do have positions in that. And we're looking at elements of invasive species now, for example, emerald ash borers, those types of issues are affecting our timber industries. And this agroecological part is that part where we work in this space where we have a lot of pest pressures, environmental pressures, and so on that affect our agriculture. So we knew that's a place people need to work at. And then technology stewardship, which is kind of an odd one, but a lot of our technologies, and think antibiotics, for example. We hear a lot about that as we use antibiotics as a really important portion of livestock productivity and support. Microbes are changing all the time. They develop resistance to some of those antibiotics. Those are areas and that goes to some other treatments in agriculture we're using for crop protection too. How do we steward those technologies? How do we assure that they're working for the long term for farmers? So those are the key areas, and as you can see, just about anybody across agriculture could find a space in that at the foundational parts of what they do. And then, of course, you bring that education to take it out into the broader community of producers. Investment-wise, I've mentioned quite a few of those, but the big one is the human infrastructure. That's the main component in terms of funding for a GREET. Rapid response funds. We get rapid response funds in other areas as well, and the goal of that is you'll find agriculture is pretty dynamic. Recently, I'll think of water hemp, for example, in crop systems. You think about PRRS in swine. You think about avian influenza. Those are all issues that crop up into agriculture. We need a response of what you do quickly. Extension does a terrific job of bringing what our current knowledge is into those spaces, and then working to bring that back from farmers into what do we do in our research labs to carry forward and address that. And so that rapid response is not recurring. It is recurring money that comes in, but every 2 years we have a cycle where we look at funding these really emerging issues that are coming up so we can get in front of those for the state of Minnesota. And we also have elements of this that we have ongoing, of course, to do that. We keep a reserve just in case something pops up at some point that we can come at it very quickly and bring education or research to that problem. So it's a really important part of GREET to be responsive to the changing conditions in agriculture. I mentioned avian influenza a bit later. Mitch Hunter will provide some insights on Forever Green beyond that. There's a deep winter greenhouse program as well as a well, I'll come to that one. But a couple years ago, there's been add-ins to GREET occasionally for specific activities as determined by the legislature. So those have been a key part. This last year also, a Minnesota tribal representative was added to the advisory group with a GREET. So we worked with MIAC to identify that individual. He's with the White Earth Reservation, or White Earth Band, and so he's joined that advisory group. As we work on issues, for example, of natural stands of wild rice and some of the pressures that are faced in that with regard to climate, water levels, water conditions, and so on. So that was brought into a GREET as well. And I have a list on here that you can see of the members of that group, broadly speaking, across Minnesota's agricultural natural resources sectors overall. To give you some sense of the impact, and I often say when we talk about this, this has been a game-changing investment by the state of Minnesota for us. It really did bring in a cohort, as you can see. I'll talk about the numbers on this later. There's 21 CFANS faculty, 5 College of Vet Med faculty, and 9 extension educators. And many of those faculty in CFANS and the College of Veterinary Medicine are partners in extension, so they have those joint appointments. This group of people, I'd love to go through each one of those folks because they're really bringing some real innovation and energy to the work we're doing, whether it's on how do we manage manure more effectively in our cropping systems and with livestock systems. We have people working on poultry and avian influenza, bringing that to bear. We're bringing it to, if you're deer hunting, somebody mentioned they have some deer lands they have in their family, CWD, and working on how do we manage CWD in the environment. And broadly across that, I could go on, but they're very top tier. We try to keep them relevant and active in that research that's important for people. And bringing in these new faculty have been extraordinarily invigorating for our college overall, because they bring in grants and research, they engage other people in that research, and so it builds out and multiplies out from them. But a terrific group of people we've been able to bring in. And actually across the country, when we talk to other universities, it's one of those areas that other people are often saying, you know, how did you get this? It's something we'd really like to have to be able to make that sort of an investment. And here's some of the numbers, by the numbers. I mentioned those I was going through it, so I won't spend a lot of time here. But they are across those 3 areas of the university with CFANS, College of Food, Agriculture, Natural Resource Sciences, College of Veterinary Medicine, and with Extension as well. An important part of this, this is an investment. And I'll back up a bit to note that in Minnesota, we get about a 12-to-1 return on investment for every dollar we invest in agriculture and research, because it goes out into the field, people adopt new technologies, new practices, new crops, and those come into our economic portfolio. And I won't talk about that beyond that because this is more directly to the work that these faculty and extension educators are doing. But over the time period, if you go to that bottom maroon box, you'll see the state of Minnesota since 2015 and the total amount invested in that recurring investment is about $39 million. Then that top yellow box, the top line on that is these faculty have gotten more than 364 sponsored awards. And those sponsored awards, by and large, are from some are from government, some are private sector, some are from NGOs and so on that come into that funding. A lot of that funding from the government comes from federal funding, from USDA, for example. Really critical because that funding brings with it overhead charges that help us to support the infrastructure and needs we have for barns, fields, facilities, greenhouses that do our work. But we've basically matched that by about a factor of 4 times on what's been invested by the state, and that income coming direct, and that's direct. You can look at a budget sheet and say this is money that's flowed into grants and contracts. That's not including what I was talking about earlier. When this goes out through extension to farms, to communities, that goes into people adopting practices that improve the economics of those areas. And you hear some of that going forward as well. So it's been a tremendous, I think, return on investment for the state of Minnesota, broadly speaking. Everybody eats, so everybody gets a return on that investment. Everybody's invested in our environment, being healthy and supporting agriculture, so everybody gains when we do this research. These are just some examples. I'll hit on these just very quickly because our other 2 presenters have some very specific, important examples. But we work across greenhouse gas sampling in Minnesota livestock farms. A lot is for identifying credits for those farms, as well as just managing odor from other areas. Fertility in turkey breeders. this important issue of how do we maintain the productivity of our turkey herds, and particularly with immune response that's occurring with some of the pathogens that are affecting turkeys like avian influenza, and so on, try to maintain those productivity aspects. I talked about CWD work that's going on. Greenhouse and dairy cattle, one of those issues of what cattle eat affects what they emit, and so we can reduce greenhouse gases by the feeds we feed, and it's having some real impacts there out at West Central Research Outreach Center in Morris. Herbicide-resistant weeds, a huge issue of how are we managing some of those pests and crops and weeds. My colleagues, a weed scientist, weeds are one of the biggest factors affecting crop productivity globally. And so it's a really critical issue for our farmers in Minnesota as well. Weed management strategies and soil health is part of that as well. I'll just mention this one. You hear a lot about AI nowadays. In particular, we are engaged in AI. This is an NSF grant that came to the University of Minnesota. It's about $20 million. We have 2 faculty members in a GREET that are central to the development of this program, and it's looking at agricultural systems. It's AI climate, and climate, if you asked me to say what the acronym is, I wouldn't get it right. It's not for agriculture, it's focused on production side of this. How do we increase the efficiency and productivity of agricultural production, which automatically reduces some of our water requirements, it reduces our land use pressures, it reduces some of the climate activities from that agriculture. We're excited about that. It goes across the University of Minnesota. So when you see the 3 of us here from CFANS, College of Food and Natural Resource Sciences, Extension, and Forever Green, this goes to our College of Science and Engineering as a grant coming in that was spurred by some of the work we're doing. So we're leveraging again across the university to engage in these issues. So really exciting program that's come out of and directly related to this as well. Animal health, College of Veterinary Medicine, I haven't mentioned a lot, but as many people know, that's a significant as we're looking at new disease pressures, trying to prevent diseases like African swine flu coming into the U.S. A lot of the work that's being done, this is on areas of vet med, so PRRS research being done, quality certification, biosecurity education for producers to reduce those prospects in their facilities, and again, some of the emissions work that's happening there. And then we impact industry as well. So faculty at RJ, Amam Charla, is the director of the Midwest Dairy Foods Research Center. So if you've ever gone to the state fair and you've seen the blue cheese, award-winning blue cheese that comes out of the University of Minnesota, it's looking at how do we advance the productivity and products from our dairy industry is the big picture of the Midwest Dairy Food Research Center. That's actually a partnership with Midwest Dairy Association and Minnesota Dairy, so that we're working with dairy producers to try to advance the use of products coming from our agricultural components. And we do that around biofuels as well as part of this work going along with that. And of course, we see urban agriculture emerging as a key part of our work, and we're trying to be inclusive in supporting all forms of agriculture. So we've worked, for example, with the Hmong Farming Association on medicinal herbs and market values for those, for example. So we're really affecting everyone. So with that, I apologize that was quick, but we want to cover some of these areas. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mitch Hunter, who's the director, co-director of Forever Green Initiative at the University of Minnesota in CFANS. Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Dean Boer. Let's hold up just a second if anybody has any questions or comments to ask Dean Boer before we proceed. I had one question. You talked about veterinary college with the GREET, and we're all hearing about shortages of veterinarians around the state. Does the GREET have anything to do with veterinary training and getting more folks out in the field? Dean Boer?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Overall, just for context, we don't have a specific teaching component to this, but all of the work that we do, so all of our many of our faculty members, whether it's extension teaching or classroom teaching, we do have faculty that are in College of Vet Medicine from a GREET that are teaching in their curriculum within their vet med program, supporting students in their education. In terms of recruiting, we don't do direct recruiting with the GREET funding because of the charge of a GREET in terms of attracting more students and doing that. But certainly, in all cases, when you look at this, we have about 27, as I said, 26 faculty that are in CFAN, CVM extension that we wouldn't otherwise have to support those programs. So that teaching component that every faculty member at the university has carries over into that area.
Very good, thank you. Next up, identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Yes, Mr. Chair and members, my name is Mitch Hunter. I'm the co-director of the Forever Green Initiative. Good to see you all. And I know that many of you are familiar with our work, but there's a few new folks, so I wanted to give a brief overview. So as Dean Burr mentioned, we are an initiative within CFANS, and our goal is to develop and deploy novel winter annual and perennial cash crops. So it's not cover crops in the typical sense that you might think about of plant them, probably terminate them, get a lot of environmental benefits, but there's nothing to harvest. We're working on developing cash crops that can grow over the winter, either as a perennial or an annual, so that farmers get to have something to harvest on the other side. The goal is to improve our soil and water quality by keeping that cropland covered all year round. We call it continuous living cover. So a perennial crop can do that on its own for multiple years, or you can weave together winter annuals with traditional summer annuals like corn, soybeans, wheat. And to do this, we need to build the markets for it. And so we're looking into food, feed, and fuel markets. The idea is you need to have a market pull to get adoption of these new crops. And in doing so, you create business opportunities. So that can be across the board, but I think a lot of those will land in rural areas. And so fostering rural economic vitality is another big piece of our mission. And we were very fortunate and very grateful that last session, the Ag Committee passed support for us through GREET. That had been a long-time goal of ours to have some stable long-term funding. And this helps us do two main things. One is the core of our work is around plant breeding. The corn and the soybeans and the wheat, the main crops that farmers grow, those have all benefited from decades and decades and decades of intensive breeding work, both from universities, from the federal government, and now largely from companies, especially in the case of corn and soybeans. If we're going to put out crops that can work alongside those and be attractive to farmers, they need to perform really well. And so we invest a lot of our resources into breeding. And yet, going into 2 years ago, we had 4 key breeders who were on soft funding. The rest of our breeding group are tenured faculty members, so we're leveraging their salaries to give us that stability. In this case, we had these other 4 who didn't have that stability. And so the GREET funding has stabilized that group as well as management capacity. So myself as the co-director and my colleague Colin Curitin as our Director of Commercialization, Adoption, and Scaling. I wanted to touch on some accomplishments that have arisen within the last year from that GREET funding. So I think many of you knew of Dr. Don Wise. He was our co-founder and co-director. Don tragically passed away last summer unexpectedly. And we had been planning for a leadership transition. That's why I was brought on board. And so at least we had a plan in place. But it wouldn't have worked if we hadn't had this GREET funding underpinning it, to have that stability so that we have confidence that going forward, the initiative will have stable management. Personal thanks to you for that. Dr. Dean Bird talked about leveraging, and we've had a really successful year of grantsmanship, I guess you would say, in 2024. Like I said, GREET provides $802,000 a year to Forever Green. We've raised over $13 million in 2024. I'm not going to promise that's going to be our success rate every single year, but we've had a lot of success, and that's going to build on our work in a significant way. As far as the work of our breeders, so we have a second variety of Kernza. Kernza is a perennial grain crop that can keep the soil covered for multiple years. Our second variety, and the second variety in the world really, is going to be developed in 2025. There's a pipeline behind that, and we're making significant progress on other crops, including perennial cereal rye, pennycress, hazelnuts, and winter pea, all supported directly from GREET. And then finally, as far as actually getting this out onto the landscape, into the marketplace, so we have something called the ECO program. This is administered in conjunction with the Department of Ag. It's funded by the Clean Water Fund, and it does farmer support, technical assistance, and de-risking payments for these new crops, because we're still in the process of developing things like crop insurance. That program, the enrollment hit 3,000 acres kind of last winter. This winter, we're seeing record enrollment again, so it'll keep going up. And on the market engagement side, to develop the demand and the market pull, we're incubating and about to roll out new programs that are really targeted to different types of businesses: startups, small businesses, and large businesses. And then finally, I wanted to give one example that kind of paints this picture in more detail. So winter camelina is one of our leading crops, something I spent a lot of time working on, and it's getting discussed a lot recently because of the uptick of interest in SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. I want to highlight that winter camelina is not just for SAF, but that's an important market for it. So last winter, we had about 2,000 acres in the ground between Minnesota and North Dakota. That's growing a lot this winter. We also had some of the grain that was harvested last summer across Minnesota farms was crushed in West Fargo by Cargill, and then a portion of it was refined into jet fuel and brought to MSP Airport. And that was the very first time that sustainable aviation fuel made it to MSP Airport, was blended into the fuel system and flew planes, and they all landed, no crashes. So it went well. Our latest news on this front is that we are the recipient of a $10 million award from the Department of Energy. That's going to fuel our research for the next 6 years and allow us to nail down a lot of the agronomic questions that need to be addressed. And then going forward, we're going to continue the breeding and agronomy research, which is really primarily state-funded, expand our on-farm piloting, try to do more to accelerate the work on crop insurance, both with the federal government and with a major local lender who's interested in working with us on this. And then we're pulling together a really diverse group of folks, public, private, NGO, environment, agriculture, industry, kind of a representative group to together chart the path. How are we going to get to 1 million acres of winter camelina? What is it going to take for regulatory and economics and the research, so that then we have a roadmap that we can follow and get everyone pushing behind that vision to get us to real scale of winter camelina. That's all I have to say. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Hunter. Any questions from members? Representative Jacobs.
Thank you. Very interesting. $10 million award from Department of Energy. That's pretty impressive. What do you think you'll deliver from that $10 million? Will it actually be product, or is it going to be all research and development?
Great question. Thank you. The Department of Energy is.
Please go to the chair.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So the Department of Energy is very focused on industry development. They selected, this whole program was focused on supporting the next feedstocks for things like fuel. And so they selected proposals based on their ability to deliver that in the real world and not just publish a bunch of papers. So what we're going to do is have 5 research sites ranging from central North Dakota down through Rosemont. So we have this wide range of soils and different climates to understand how these crops perform in different environments. We'll grow them for 5 years. That'll both build out a big data set, and the federal government needs that data to evaluate these crops. You've probably heard of the GREET model these days with the 45Z tax credit, looking at corn and soybeans. Well, we need these crops to be represented in the GREET model too if they're going to be used as fuels. So part of it is a data set that goes into that, but we've also layered on top of that very targeted agronomic research to overcome bottlenecks. How do you get this established after a longer season crop like corn? How do you most efficiently manage nitrogen to save money for farmers, make it economically pan out? And then how do you get the second crop established? So the way that we grow these winter oil seeds, camelina and pennycress, you plant them in the fall, they overwinter, and then to be most economically efficient, we plant a second crop of soybean that next year so that you harvest your oil seeds and then you can harvest your soybean within the same year. As you can imagine, that's pretty new. We've proven that it can work. Farmers have done it, but we need to keep working out the kinks on that so that we can go to farmers and say, this is a system that really works. This isn't something barely out of the lab that we don't have any confidence in. That's the goal.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Anderson.
Representative Burkle.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Quick question about, you're talking about the feedstock with the camelina. Is there a test run concurrently? I would assume there's some kind of meal byproduct from this. Are you doing any tests with livestock at any level to see how that's working as far as feeding animals?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Hunter?
Mr. Chair, thank you. Yes, we are. So that's a critical component of this. If you just were able to sell the oil and you ended up with a giant pile of meal, it wouldn't go very far. So you have to have a market for the meal as well. It is high protein. It's analogous to like a canola meal. And so we have high confidence that it's going to work, and there's even regulatory approval to use it with cattle and broilers and layers. But we want to expand that. We also want to expand the inclusion rate that's allowed in their diet. So we are entering into some additional research I've mentioned Cargill a couple of times. They're our key partner in rolling this out. They're incredibly experienced at merchandising different seed meals and moving that into the feed market, and they're really taking the lead on, developing that aspect of it.
Any follow-up? No. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you kind of alluded to it a few times in here, when we talked about some of these, alternative crops. One of the challenges is we may be able to grow them, but what's the market? And I'm thankful that you're working with, Cargill and Delta and others. Are there other avenues you're, approaching as well? Part of this is it's highlighted the camelina, but, are there similar, is that, processing and all of this, I think that's one of the concerns, coming from as a farmer myself. It's great to have another crop, but now what? I hate to have a bin full, and now what do we do with it?
Mr. Hunter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's an excellent question. We wrestle with that every day, and each crop is very, very different. So if we had, if farmers were going to harvest 10, 20, I'd venture to say 100,000 acres of camelina this summer, we could move that oil and meal. The market is extremely hungry for that. Now we would need to be dealing with practicalities like bin space and rail cars and those sorts of things. Whereas some of our other crops, we're working actively to develop that market. So I mentioned Kernza briefly. You're agreed to supporting our Kernza and perennial grains breeder. That's been out of the market for about 5 years, and it's been a bit of a bumpy road, to be honest. What we've seen in the last year is that the market is firming up and growing for organic Kernza. And that basically is sold out. That tends to be the alignment with consumer preferences that we're seeing today. So General Mills, Patagonia Provisions are some of the bigger players that are coming into that, and they're showing, sustained commitment, which is nice to see. The conventional side is still struggling, but we are also seeing new innovators coming in. There's a startup called Arcola Farms that's trying to crack that nut and figure out how you move large quantities of that grain. But you're absolutely right. Farmers need a place to deliver these crops. Having it sit in your bin or your shed for a year or 2 or 3 is just not going to work. So we're working actively in the market to develop those relationships. There's a grower-owned co-op focused on Kernza. I think 4 out of the 5 Kernza distributors nationally are based in Minnesota. So there's a lot of entrepreneurial energy and also a number of challenges with a brand new crop like that. And each one's going to follow a different path. We have a winter barley type that's winter hardy enough for southern Minnesota, northern Iowa. We're speaking with a major maltster that's interested in bringing some barley production back to Minnesota. It's mostly all moved out of state, right? So very different pathway than a small startup or than a Cargill, but we're trying to find that product market fit for each of our different crops, and that's the goal.
Representative Gander.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious how it is that we could bring, are we talking about 2 crops then off of a patch of soil in a year? I know Brazil has done this for many years. They get multiple crops. They have a longer growing season than we do. Just curious for my own knowledge, how does that not some way deplete the soil? Do we have crops that can fixate nutrients from the atmosphere and actually put it into the ground? It seems like when you take that organic material out, then it could deplete, but I'm sure you have a workaround or a strategy in place. Please educate. I'm sorry if that's too far afield, but it's kind of, if we're ag people, it's good to know these things. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
No question is too far afield in the Ag Committee. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is a very fair question, and I think historically, fallow was used in crop rotations to regenerate soil, to let the land rest. That's kind of a notion that we've had. But more recently, the research has suggested what you want to be doing is keeping living plants on your soil all year round. Those living plants are what feed the soil. And even if you remove the top growth or even just a portion of it, in this case, we're removing the seeds and leaving the stems and the leaves and everything else behind, it's still better to have that continual living root in the soil to take carbon out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis, feed it to the microbes in the soil, hold the soil in place, keep it from washing away. You can't have a healthy soil if it's washing away. right? So you have to have armor on the soil, and there's nothing better than living armor to do that. So if you never added fertilizer, yes, you would deplete phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen's always cycling, so you'd be short on nitrogen. So yes, you do have to fertilize these crops, but in general, we're not concerned about soil depletion, and in fact, we think this is a really important strategy for retaining and ultimately building our soil.
Very good. Thanks, Mr. Hunter. I would agree that the market for the camelina oil would be an astounding demand market with sustainable fuel. I would just relate, a neighbor of mine planted a field of it, would be in the fall of '23, with the idea of planting soybeans into it this past spring and then harvesting the camelina and then the soybeans grow up. But Mother Nature had the way, and we had an extremely wet May and June and just couldn't get out there in time to get the soybeans planted. And it got too wet for the camelina. So in that case, the idea is there to get the 3 crops in 2 years basically. But it takes the cooperation of Mother Nature too to make those things happen. But just really a good idea, and the demand is out there for the oil of a crop like camelina. Also canola, just an outstanding oil crop, about 40% oil. Excellent. Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to Dean Bergen. Thanks for your patience. Bev Durgan, and go ahead with the testimony.
Great. Thank you, Chair Anderson and members of the committee. I appreciate you allowing me to be here today. I'm Bev Durgan, Dean of University of Minnesota Extension. So I was asked today to talk a little bit about our farm safety and health program. Just wanted to make sure that everybody understands that this is kind of a move away from a GREET. So this is not funded by a GREET. This is funded by other extension funding. So I just thought I would make sure I told you that. So many of you know our extension educator, Emily Kreckenberg. She is the one that leads our farm safety and health programming in extension. She is located at our regional office in Rochester, but she does work across the state with many of our partners. We have a number of signature programs that we have to deliver our farm safety and health programming across the state. One of the first ones is the Youth Tractor and Farm Safety Training. This was put in statute last year, asking Extension to develop a youth tractor and farm safety program. We have done that, and we hold trainings, in-person trainings at locations throughout the state last year to help youth understand safety within tractors and also other farm safety. We know that many youth are working directly on farms. They're working on family farms. They're also working on other farms, and safety is a very important factor as those youth are working on those farms. So we market this program through our youth programs. Currently, just a little plug for 4-H, we have currently 50,000 youth in Minnesota involved in our 4-H programs, directly in our club program. So we impact a lot of youth within Minnesota, and we also market these programs through 4-H and FFA. We also have other programs. One program we have is in collaboration with North Dakota State University. North Dakota State is a great partner for us. For those of you that don't know that, we have 7 joint faculty at North Dakota State University that serves Northwest Minnesota. So we are using part of their curriculum for training programs. That is really based on aging. You know, whether we like it or not, our farmers are aging, and safety issues change as we are looking at a population that is aging on the farm, and safety and making sure that not only our youth are safe on the farm, but our, I hate to say older, but our aging farmers are also safe on the farm. We also know that there is a lot of mental health challenges for our farmers, and they continue, as Chair Anderson said, that weather is a major stressor on our farms. And so making sure that we have programs that help our growers to access mental health programs and have mental health programs is very important to them. And also, we know that farming isn't done alone. It is done by families and done by couples. So being able to support those family farmers as they are making decisions on the farm is also part of our overall health programs within Extension. Our main audience for these programs is, number one, is our farmers, again, throughout the state, but rural youth. We have, as I said, our 4-H program is in every county throughout the state, and we impact many rural youth, and we involve them in these programs, especially ones involved in agriculture. And we also have programs that are directed right to the agricultural professionals. We know that Extension does not directly work with every farmer in the state, but we have agricultural professionals that do, whether they're at the local farmers co-op or whether they are at the feed store. So we have programs directed to them too, to give them resources around farm safety and also health programs. And I think all of you know why these topics are important to Minnesota. They're important to Extension too, because this is the audience that we already serve. So we serve rural communities, we serve farmers, and we serve youth. So making sure that they're have access to health resources and work safely on the farm is important for Extension. We all know that when we hear about a tragedy on a farm, whether it is a serious farm accident or it's a death on the farm, we all wish that we were able to make sure that we have the latest resources to those farmers to prevent those kind of accidents happening on the farm. And Extension, that's one thing that we're very serious about. And then finally, I think many of you know how Extension we do our work, is that we do our work with partners. We really can't do this work by ourselves. Minnesota is a big state, so we work very closely with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. We work with the ag advocates and the mental health resources at the Department of Ag. We also, as I said, we work with our other land-grant universities. North Dakota State is a great partner for us. And we also have another center at the University of Minnesota called UMash. If any of you have been at Farm Fest, you have seen their display there. It's the University of Minnesota Ag Safety and Health Center. That center is in the School of Public Health, so we work directly with them on many of our farm safety programs as we direct those across the state. So with that, that is a very quick overview of our farm safety programs and our health programs. You can find more about all these programs on our website, so you could go there. Or if you would like to have more information, I would encourage you to invite Emily to one of your hearings. If you did, she can give you a lot more details and a lot more enthusiasm. So for those of you that know Emily. So with that, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Dean Durgan. Very much important work that you're doing in all around the state, so we say thank you. Questions from members? We have time. Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. I was expecting to hear maybe some kind of connection to 4-H. Is there any connection to 4-H with any of these programs or not?
Yes, so 4-H is part of
Durgan?
Extension. Oh, I'm sorry, Chair Anderson, Representative. Yes, 4-H is part of Extension. We currently have 50,000 youth enrolled in 4-H programs across the state in our clubs programs. So we do target the farm safety programs to that youth audience. We also work with FFA, so some of the older youth in the state. So yes, so they're an integral part of what we do. Large percent of our 4-Hers come from rural Minnesota, and many of them are still involved in agricultural programs.
One follow-up
Representative
question.
Jacob.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. One of the issues that my district faces, and I think it's probably statewide, if not nationwide, is the disconnect between the rural community and the urban community. So with you suggest 4-H and FFA, is there any part of your programs that seeks to kind of bring awareness to the urban community of really the, agricultural background, I should say? Is there any connection there?
Dean Durgan.
Chair Anderson, Representative, we have a number of programs. We don't have programs specifically targeted to that rural-urban interface, but we do have programs. One would be our Master Gardener Program that's in all counties of the state, where we work with both urban and rural communities to talk, urban agriculture is increasing in the state. And as more people are involved in urban agriculture, there's a greater sense of what it takes to raise food, to market food, what growing of food is about. So that increases the awareness of what is happening in rural communities. We also have a department in Extension called the Department of Community Development. And a lot of those programs are really based on conversations in rural communities and also looking at rural leaders, developing rural leaders. So all of those kind of programs kind of, have that interface of rural leaders to be able to tell their story, because we know that the stories coming from rural communities are much more effective if they're coming from people living in those communities. So we have a number of those leadership programs. And then we also, our 4-Hers are across both rural and urban. We have a number of leadership programs within 4-H, our state ambassadors, we have our ag ambassadors, and one of the targets that we have for increasing the literacy around agriculture is at county and state fairs. So we have our 4-H ag ambassadors that are at those state fairs, that are in those animal barns or other places, really talking to that urban audience about what it means to raise those animals. And there's no better story than that story from that youth that is doing that. So a lot of those things that you could maybe not think about really targeting that, but a lot of those things kind of make a difference of you're trying to get those conversations between both rural and urban citizens of Minnesota.
Representative Jacob?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Anderson. Yeah, really, I'd say heartwarming to hear county fairs, things of that nature, not just bringing urban and rural together, but young and old. Those are, it's important for the urban communities to understand what the rural communities are doing to feed the world. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Any further comment, Dean Durgan?
No, Chair Anderson, I just wanted to say that one of the issues that we have seen in the last few years with 4-H is to keeping our older 4-Hers in the program. They want to be challenged, they want to have new things, and developing our Ag Ambassador Program and our State Ambassador Program, giving those older 4-Hers more responsibility and more ways for them really to interact. They just really love it. And so we are working at every county level too to have county ambassadors, to have them to have more, both statewide and county, to give that experience to those older 4-Hers. As you know, 4-Hers, they love public speaking, they love to teach, and giving those opportunities to them has really increased our ability to retain those older 4-Hers. So thank you for that. They would love to hear that.
And I would add, too, a good comment, a good topic to discuss. And county fairs are changing. Back when we were younger, at least when I was younger, it was mainly dairy cattle and beef cattle and hogs at the county fair. Today, it's a lot of goats and chickens and ducks and things like that. So is more of the city kids get involved in a 4-H program and are attracted to that, and they have a garden project or raise animals of their own. Why, it's a good way, as you say, to get kids involved in that. And the other thing I would mention, we didn't really mention FFA. A lot of chapters here in the cities are being organized, some right here in St. Paul. The FFA chapters, as kids really are taking an interest in where their food comes from. So FFA also is doing a really good job in telling that story and bridging that gap between urban and rural. Any other further questions from members? Anybody in the audience care to testify? If not, thank you all. Testifiers, you're spot on with your comments and thoughts, and thanks for the updates. And we may have you back again, so thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you.
Switching topics now to, I guess, kind of away from ag, but this committee is also tasked with broadband, funding broadband here at the state. And we have a couple of testifiers here. We thank them for that. And I have to mention that we did invite the Office of State Broadband Office, and they declined to take us up on the offer and will not be here to testify today before our committee. We do have some folks from the industry. We thank them for that. First up is, I believe, Mr. Christensen. So please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Anderson and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Brent Christensen, and I'm the President and CEO of the Minnesota Telecom Alliance, which I'll tell you about here in a minute. MTA we represent 42 rural broadband providers throughout the state of Minnesota that operate over 70 what you would know as traditional landline telephone companies. Our membership ranges from Lumen, who's our biggest member, CenturyLink, to one member. We have a co-op in south central Minnesota that has 260 telecom customers and everything in between. We're a mix of cooperatives, family-owned companies, commercially, publicly traded, privately held companies. My background is from the industry. I'm fifth-generation telephone guy from Medelia, Minnesota. We basically represent all of the telecom companies in Minnesota except for Frontier and Windstream. A little bit about what we're not. We're not cellular companies. We're not VoIP providers like Vonage and Magicjack. And our members have all transitioned from being landline telephone companies to rural broadband providers. So I was asked to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities from our perspective on deploying rural broadband. And to do that, I want to give a little bit of history and a little bit of background and kind of let you know a little bit where we are, and then we can talk about what we need to do to move forward. Right now, we got about 1.6 million residential locations served with the aspirational goal, the 2026 goal of 100 megabits down and 20 megabits up, which is set in statute as I said, the 2026 speed goal. We got about 189,000 residential locations throughout the state of Minnesota that we have left to serve. So we've got about 88% of the way there and about less than 12% to go. And I will tell you in the coming slides that it's going to cost us as much to do that last 12% as it did to do the first 88. I want to talk a little bit before I get into some of the state and federal money that we get to deploy broadband. And this is just among the MTA membership. Ms. Wolf is going to talk about her membership. But my members have invested of their own private money over $359.4 million in 2023 and over $293 million in 2024. So for a 2-year period, that's private investment of over $653 million. And I want you to remember that number because I'm going to come back to the BEAD number of federal money that's going to be coming into the state. Now, this is a very busy slide. I don't expect you to look at it. The purpose of this slide is to show you what Minnesota has done through our border-to-border broadband grant program. The state of Minnesota has funded and awarded grants for over a 10-year period. And the thing that's the most important about this, and this slide has a breakdown of all the awards, but the biggest thing that I want you to see is the bottom numbers. The $411,000, this $411,744, that's $411 million that the state of Minnesota has taken from the general fund and put into the border-to-border grant program. That $411 million has also brought in $847 million in private and public match. So in order to do this program, in order to participate in the border-to-border grant program, you have to partner with a public entity. So a telco or a cable provider will partner with a city or a county or a township and will leverage those dollars and match those. So your $411 million investment over 10 years has brought in $1.2 billion in broadband deployment. That's how we got to the 88%. So I think that's very significant that this has been a very successful program over the years. There's still some trails of the program through the line extension and some, I think the line extension money is the only thing that's left in the program. But I just wanted to highlight how important this program has been over the last 10 years to get us to where we are today. I have testified before legislatures in Kansas and Michigan about this program. It's called the Minnesota Model. And it has been, we spent a lot of time on this in the very beginning, getting the rules right. And it really, in my opinion, has paid off. The other thing that has come about this is the creation of the Office of Broadband Development. And we don't have enough time for me to tell you about the great things about OBD. That office was created to not only administer the grant program, but also break down silos between state agencies and advance broadband deployment. And it has been very successful in that. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the federal money that has been coming into the state of Minnesota. On your phone bills and your landline cellular bills, you'll see an FUSF charge, Federal Universal Service Charge. That money all goes into the Federal Universal Service Fund. And in that fund, there's a number of programs that are funded out of that program. And it's managed by the Universal Service Administration Corporation, or USAC, which is selected and appointed by the FCC. So those monies are collected and they're handed out in a variety of different programs. E-rate for schools and libraries. There's a rural health care program. There's a number of other programs, but the one I want to focus on is the high cost program. And it was developed over 4 decades ago to bridge that gap and make rural telephone service affordable. And it has since made the transition from telephone service to broadband and to try to make that more affordable. It tips the scales, just like the border-to-border grant program does, on business cases and allows my members to build broadband where they otherwise wouldn't be able to make a business case to get to. And there are a number of programs in this from 2016 committed through 2028. Minnesota, just in Minnesota, is going to receive $1.2 billion from the USF High Cost Fund. And that goes into a number of different programs, the Connect America Fund, or CAF2, the Alternative Connect America Fund model, and so on. I won't read all of these. On top of that, the Rural Utility Service has a Reconnect program that gives out grants and loans to areas to help make business cases make sense to deploy rural broadband. Minnesota has received over $44 million through the last 5 rounds. And you start adding that up, I mean, you're getting close to $3 billion that's come into Minnesota. Not all of that is used to deploy broadband. A lot of that is to maintain the networks and keep them going. So it's a little confusing when you get into what all that money is needed for. But the bottom line is it takes a lot of money to maintain the networks and to grow and expand the networks. So one of the things that's coming down the pipe and that we're right in the middle of now is the IIJA came up with or allotted the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or BEAD. And they assigned a dollar amount to every state and awards and grants, and then it's up to each state to determine how that is distributed. It's managed and run through the National Telecommunications Information Administration, or NTIA, and NTIA basically set the terms and conditions in which states can apply and to get this money. Where we are right now, there's $652 million awarded to Minnesota, which, if you remember from my previous number, is $1 million in what we've gotten private investment from 23 and 24. They have sub-grantee rounds, so they're going to put out a round for sub-grantees for internet service providers to bid to participate in this. They're going to do it through 3 rounds. They're going to be starting next month. I think it's next month or March. And then they have to have their plan. They have to have a plan to distribute or get broadband to all Minnesotans by October 3rd. And how they're going to use the $652 million to get broadband to all Minnesotans. And then, once they award those subgrantees, then they have 4 years to build it out. Unfortunately, the good news is BEAD sounds like it's $652 million that's going to come to Minnesota. Well, that's grants. That's there will be a match involved, but not much of one. So that's free money. Why wouldn't you take it? Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of obstacles that come with it, and a lot of strings attached, both at the federal level and the state level. So I want to talk through some of those issues, and I'll talk through it with the federal ones. A lot of my members are telling me, actually all my members are telling me that they don't intend on participating in this. They got 10 years of track record of participating in border-to-border successfully, but they don't want to participate in this. And one of the reasons is because in the federal rules, anything that you put in the ground, any fiber you put in the ground using this money, they have a lien on for 20 years. So the NTIA will have a lien on your facilities. Well, if you've borrowed money to put in other infrastructure and you have to turn around and give a sub-lien to that, it doesn't work. Another requirement that they have is your networks have to be open access. So you put the fiber in the ground, but you have to open that fiber up to your competitors and allow them to use it. So you're not guaranteed to get those customers. And that kind of is what your business case depends on. Personally, I've been in the industry for almost 30 years. I have never seen an open network work anywhere in the country. The last federal obstacle that we're dealing with is that you have to have your archaeological and environmental requirements, you have to have your permits in place before you sign your final contract with the state. So you have to invest in getting those permits, and permitting has taken a long time. And you can't have applied for them. You have to have them in your hand before you can sign the contract. That kicks the can further down the road. It also kicks the shot clock for the 4 years down the road, but that just drives up your costs because things don't get cheaper when you plan them. Unfortunately, we also have some state obstacles that make this unattractive. One of the plans that the NTIA required the Office of Broadband to have in there is a self-funded low-cost program. We had a thing during the pandemic called ACP, Affordable Connectivity Program, and it was designed as a short-term federal program to make sure that we got people connected to the internet so that they could work from home and go to school from home. The money in that program ran out. And NTIA says you can use that program, but if it's not there, you have to be able to basically create your own. Well, I'll tell you, for a larger company that's got a big customer base and a large business base, you can spread those costs out and you can offer those programs, and many companies do. But for my smaller members, the smaller companies that have 8 employees or less, we have one company that has 3 employees. They don't have the base to offer a low-cost program and offer it for less than what it costs them to provide that service. There's also a prevailing wage requirement that actually you get extra points if there's a competitive part for prevailing wage. And let me be clear, I am not against prevailing wage. I mean, the reality is we have to pay that to get the workers in the seats anyway. The problem with prevailing wage in Minnesota is 2. One is it throws on a bunch of reporting requirements that's burdensome for small companies. The other thing that it does is there's no telecom-specific job classifications. I'll give you an example. In Erskine, Minnesota, they had a project, and it fell under prevailing wage because it was a middle mile project, and there wasn't a classification for a fiber splicer. And if you've ever seen a fiber, you've seen those trailers in the ditches, a truck and a trailer behind it, sorry, and there's a guy in there, and he's got fiber in there, and he's splicing melting glass together to make the fiber work. Don't get me wrong, that's a technical job, you have to be good at it. But the job classification that the state used for that was a high voltage electrical lineman, the same person that's up on the high voltage towers. I'm sorry, all due respect to my members who are fiber splicers, that job is not as dangerous as high voltage electrical lineman. So if we're gonna do prevailing wage, we have to have telecom specific classifications. We now have, as of last session, we have new certification requirements for telephone installers. The problems with that is it only applies to certain telecommunications installers, and it only applies when they're installing broadband. So if you've ever seen a directional boring machine, it puts a drill bit in the ground and it directionally bores and then pulls back the fiber. The guy who's operating it, who's running the machine, he doesn't have to be certified, but the person that's locating the drill head has to be certified. And then the only other person that has to be certified is anybody that digs up existing utilities with a hydrovac system or with a shovel. If they're exposing other existing utilities, they have to be certified. Nowhere else is that required. The backhoe operators, the plow operators, nobody else has to, just those. And in a construction situation, the laborers are pretty much everybody with a shovel doing a little bit of everything. The Department of Labor and Industry will tell you that they, and that certification training requires 40 hours. The Department of Labor and Industry patterned that because there is no other certification program like this in the country. And so Dolly didn't know what to do and how to do it. So they patterned it after the pipe layer certification. And I did not know the difference between a pipe layer and a pipe fitter until this all happened. And I had to learn it. Pipe layers basically dig up the ground, put pipe in it, and bury it up, or they bore it like we do. It's very similar to what we do. They're required to have 4 hours of training, and we're required to have 40 to do basically the same thing. So what's the answer? In my opinion, the answer is we need more carrots and less sticks. If we want the proven, trusted rural internet service providers to participate in any federal program, then we need to clear the path and clear out the junk and make it reasonable and affordable for them to participate. They've done the job. They've proven they could do the job. We want them to do the job. And so we need to offer more carrots and less sticks. Remove the obstacles to participation and find ways to incentivize broadband providers. And then we're freely admitting that there are bad actors out there. And there are bad things that are going on, and there are out-of-state providers that are coming in and hitting. They don't care what they hit. They're going to put in whatever their facilities, and then they're going to be gone. Get that. But we need to work together to go after those bad actors. And we have tools already. We have the Office of Pipeline Safety has the tools to go after bad actors. Cities and counties that permit and inspect job sites, they have the tools to go after bad actors. We don't need more tools. And I talked really fast. I apologize for that part, and I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Mr. Christensen, thanks. Very interesting testimony. And I have to ask, you mentioned the certification process. Was that part of legislation passed just last year?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it was.
Okay. That's what we were thinking. Question from Representative Lawrence.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. Most of the things you talked about were federal regulations in there. Are you coming with a way that we can get around them as far as requirements for the individuals that could utilize those funds, or are we bound by that at this point in time?
Mr. Christensen.
Chairman, Representative, I bring those up to tell you of the challenges that we face. I don't think there's anything that this body can do to address those specific problems. Minnesota has a track record from the beginning of our border-to-border grant program of working together to get problems solved. This is going to take working together with our Office of Broadband Development, which we do already, and they do a great job of that. We're going to have to work with our union partners, and we're going to have to work with everybody in this space to address the federal issues. I just bring those up to tell you some of the challenges we're facing. And I think it's going to be a collective, collaborative effort in order to get that fixed.
Mr. Christensen, you mentioned, I heard you say middle mile. I've also heard the term last mile mentioned. Could you explain to new members, and I guess myself too, the difference in how you have to pay workers in those different areas?
Mr. Chairman, that's a really good question. And the good news is I've got almost 30 years experience in this industry. The bad news is I've got almost 30 years experience in this industry, and I forget and I gloss over some of that stuff. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a term in the telecommunications industry that refers to what segment of the network we're talking about. So in my world, we use different terms than they use in the cable world. In my world, it's a middle mile is from a central office to a central office. So I would think of it as from a town to one town to another that doesn't connect any customers directly. They just get to the office, and then from the office, there are connections out from the central office to the customer premise. That's considered last mile, if that makes sense.
Thank you much. And I believe, was there a differentiation in having to pay prevailing wage for either one of those two at one point?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that did not get repealed. I think that's still in statute. We had a carefully negotiated agreement with labor a number of years ago to pay prevailing wage on the middle mile projects, but not on the last mile projects. And the problem with that, and the difference between that is, again, we don't have job classifications for telecommunications. And that was the compromise that we came up with.
Okay, very good. Thanks. Very interesting testimony, and it's been compared to getting the electricity on farms 100 years ago or whatever. It's extremely important, and thanks for your work.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to our last testifier today. Ms. Wolf, identify yourself and proceed with your testimony.
There we go.
Oh, yay.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, and thank you for the opportunity to present to the committee today. My name is Melissa Wolf. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota Cable Communications Association, or Minnesota Cable. Today, like Brent, I'm hoping to tell you a little bit more about my members, specifically in our industry and what we're doing across the state and in all of your districts. And then also mention some of the challenges and opportunities that we see ahead of us for broadband deployment and reaching every last Minnesotan. So on this slide, you will see Minnesota Cable represents cable companies who are proud to serve residents of Minnesota in every corner of the state, from Schoberg's, who operates in Thief River Falls, to SCI in Hinckley and Mediacom in Waseca. Collectively, Minnesota Cable companies provide high-speed, reliable broadband connections to over 1.5 million Minnesotans in the metro, suburbs, and rural areas. Minnesota Cable companies also have a long-standing commitment to serving Minnesota residents, and so I just want to give you a couple of examples. Arvig, which is based in Perham, Minnesota, celebrates 75 years in business this year. They transformed from a small telephone company in the 1950s to one of the nation's largest independent broadband providers today. SCI Broadband, which I mentioned is headquartered in Hinckley, was established in 1984. And they have grown from initially providing cable TV to a few rural communities to offering high-speed internet, video, and voice services to dozens of rural communities in central Minnesota. Lastly, Midco, which originated as the Wellworth Theater Company in the 1930s in Minneapolis, has evolved with technology to become a leading regional telecommunications company that operates across 5 Midwest states. So certainly it is undeniable that access to reliable high-speed internet service has become an essential service for modern society, and I know I don't need to tell any of you guys that. Minnesota cable providers are proud of the role that we have played in ensuring that our customers have access to a strong, reliable broadband connection, and we are very proud of the continuing investments that we have made to bring broadband to areas of Minnesota that do not have it. This slide illustrates how Minnesota Cable members are collaboratively working to bridge the digital divide through 3 key efforts. That's private capital investment, participation in federal broadband programs, and of course the state of Minnesota's border-to-border and broadband grant programs. In 2025 alone, cable providers will invest $173.8 million in private capital across the state and will reach an additional 53,000 homes, businesses, and schools across the state. Private investment not only expands our access, but also makes investments in networks to meet customer needs now and in the future. For example, Schoberg's plans to invest $1 million in private capital this year to enhance customer service levels from 1 gig to 10 gig and increase their backbone network to 100 gig. An important point, and I won't talk about the federal broadband programs because Brent just did a very good job of describing to you what is out there and how much money is out there, and that is coming to Minnesota providers. But just to note that several of my providers are also participating and continue to participate in those federal programs to bring broadband to more on and underserved areas across the state. I do want to echo what Brent said about the Minnesota grant programs, the border-to-border program, low density and line extension, and our Office of Broadband Development. They are an exemplary team that has united stakeholders across the state, and they are working tirelessly to bring broadband to the areas that desperately need it. We are very proud to work with them and with the state through those programs, and we are very proud to have them here in Minnesota working on behalf of Minnesotans. I also want to echo Brent in saying that, you know, without the legislature's foresight in creating these programs, long before COVID, long before federal investments in broadband deployment, the state of Minnesota made this a priority, created these programs, and you guys have continued to invest in them. And we greatly appreciate that opportunity to partner with the state. So you'll see on the far right-hand side, Minnesota cable members have received since 2014 62 state grants through those programs, totaling $53.5 million in grants received to my members, with 77 million in local match from cable providers. So some of this I've already mentioned, so I'm just going to really breeze through it. But, you know, very quickly, I wanted to touch on the impact that Minnesota Cable provides on Minnesota's economy. So again, you'll see that we serve 1.5 million Minnesota households. Minnesota cable companies employ over 13,600 direct jobs across the state and another 40,000 indirect jobs across the state. On average, Minnesota cable companies pay $188.2 million per year in state taxes and fees. Collectively, Minnesota cable companies have over 81,600 total network miles deployed across the state currently, and that grows every year. And our economic impact on the state is $2.8 billion. So certainly we understand that access to a high-speed internet connection means little without the tools and skills to use it, and there are barriers such as affordability and digital literacy that still persist. To address these challenges, my members have consistently invested in and participated in broadband assistance programs, including Comcast's Internet Essentials, which has to date connected 480,000 low-income households across Minnesota. Mediacom's Connect to Compete and Lifeline programs that are offered by both ARVIG and Midco. Additionally, Minnesota cable providers are committed to supporting the communities they serve through foundation and philanthropic efforts. Midco has awarded over $6 million to nonprofits, schools, and local governments through their Midco Foundation across the state. Charter has supported community organizations that provide computers, digital education classes, and technology labs. And Comcast has established 114 lift zones across Minnesota that offer free internet access in neighborhood community centers for students, families, and adults to utilize. Regarding affordability, I did want to recognize that a pretty unique aspect of our industry in that telecommunications and broadband are dynamic fields where competition has rapidly increased since 2010. Unlike other utilities, we are essential, but we are a competitive service, which is good for consumers. As shown on this slide and on the next slide as well, since 2010, broadband speeds have significantly increased while prices have declined. On this slide, then, you'll see this is data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that demonstrates that while inflation for other goods and services has drastically risen, broadband prices have consistently trended well below inflation over the past decade. You know, obviously with so many Minnesota families struggling to meet rising costs from groceries to gas to, cost of housing, it's critical that broadband, an essential tool in today's modern world, remains accessible and affordable. So moving on to opportunities and challenges, and some of these you have already heard about from Brent, but I will echo. I'll start with opportunities. As you can see on the right-hand side, these are the number of homes that we have left to reach. There are 143,000 unserved Minnesotans, meaning they do not have access to at least 25/3, and 189,000 underserved Minnesotans, meaning they do not have access to speeds of 100/20. And this information was from the Office of Broadband Development and is as recent as December of 2024. The first opportunity, obviously, what Brent and I have both talked about today is through providers investing in the state, not just with their capital, but with other resources like their workforce. As you've seen in the previous slide, Minnesota Cable is committed to investing and remaining in Minnesota and investing in Minnesota for the future. In addition, other areas of opportunity are Minnesota's border-to-border, low-density, and line extension programs. Even with the federal infusion of $652 million coming to the state, there will likely still be needs for programs like the line extension program in the future. And lastly, I did include BEAD as an opportunity because certainly this has a significant potential to advance connectivity in Minnesota's unserved and underserved areas if it is implemented correctly and with flexibility. So moving to the challenges, again, these are similar to what you just heard from Brent, but starting with Minnesota's new broadband installer labor program that was passed last session. As Brent mentioned as well, this was a first-in-the-nation program that adds new layers and hurdles to broadband deployment. The bill was pushed through last session without any amendments addressing industry concerns, and those concerns remain today. We are hopeful that with your help and the help of this legislature that this session we will be able to address those concerns so that providers can ensure workers are safe in the field, compliant under the law, but most importantly that we continue deploying broadband across the state and participate in programs like BEAD. Last session, we also saw bills aimed at adding a tax to internet service and franchising broadband, which will significantly harm all consumers and slow the progression of deployment. Affordability and accessibility to fast, reliable internet is essential for all Minnesotans, and adding unnecessary costs to broadband could impact everything from ensuring student access to digital tools essential to help close our state's achievement gap. I did want to mention permitting challenges, similar to many other industries that you've heard from. That remains slow and difficult to receive. I recently had one of my members tell me that it took 14 months for him to receive a permit that he needed for a project, and that is more than a construction season in Minnesota. Issues affecting permitting can range from the complexity of projects to overlapping agency jurisdiction. But what Brent mentioned is with that participation in BEAD, we need all of those permits in hand up front. So we need to encourage that we have the streamlining of state permitting processes, reduce duplicative and overlapping regulatory requirements, and enforce timely approval of permits for broadband deployment. Lastly, I also put BEAD as a challenge as well as an opportunity. It is, as I mentioned, a once-in-a-lifetime funding opportunity for our state, but its rollout has been very slow. The bill was signed into law by President Biden 4 years ago, and not a single home across the country has been connected through the program. It's faced some heavy-handed federal oversight and regulations that have caused a lot of uncertainty. And so that remains today. And my members are certainly hopeful and looking forward to participating in the program. But as the saying goes, the devil is in the details. And so until we actually see some of these portals open up, some of the requirements for the applications, for the grants, it's hard to say with certainty what degree we can participate in that program, but we are hopeful. So with that, I just wanted to, again, say thank you so much for allowing both Brent and I to talk about broadband a little bit more with you guys today. Happy to answer any questions. And certainly, if Minnesota Cable or any of our members can be a resource, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks, Ms. Wolf. Questions from members? I had one to ask you, Ms. Wolf. Out where a lot of us live, we see broadband deployment in the road ditch with a backhoe and a trailer. Now, I would assume you deal more in towns and cities. Is that where you mainly work? And then, so is your delivery system hardwired underground, or how do your customers get your service?
So actually unique to my association, I do represent members who operate across the state. So we have members who are in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and I have members who are only in rural Minnesota. As I mentioned, Schoberg's operates in Thief River Falls and 24 small surrounding communities, and that's it. So we really have a unique perspective in that we are in the metro, we are in the suburbs, and we are in rural Minnesota, and understand the unique challenges of every one of those scenarios. For, I'd say 95% of our infrastructure is in the ground. It is a wired connection, whether that be through HFC, which is hybrid fiber cable, or through just fiber deployments. And within the last couple of years, most providers have switched to just fiber.
Thank you very much. Question from Representative Vice Chair Harder.
Whoops, thank you, Chair Anderson. Okay, on your last slide, I have a question, because I think my memory needs to be refreshed, because there was a lot that happened the last 2 years that many of us did not agree with. Okay, and so on your slide, it's the one that has attempts to franchise the broadband, a new internet tax. Can you explain just a little bit more about that tax, and when did that take effect, please? Thank you.
Ms. Wolf.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you, and Representative. So this is not law. It was a bill that was introduced and made it to the House floor last session before being removed. But it would have required two different things. First being, it would have added an 8% tax on broadband and broadband-enabled services for Minnesota families. 5% of that would have gone to local governments, and 3% of that would have gone to PEG programmers, or what we call, PEG stands for Public Educational and Governmental Programming. The additional piece of that bill is that it would have required all broadband providers to negotiate lengthy franchise agreements with every community that they serve or want to expand into. Currently, Minnesota cable providers are the only franchised broadband providers in the state, meaning we do have to work with our communities to come to franchise agreements. But that is governed only over our cable services. This would have added broadband to that as well, and it would have required that we go out and get additional franchise agreements before we could expand into any new community or continue serving the communities that we did serve without having that in place first. And with experience with our cable franchises, those conversations can take a long time to come to agreement with a local community. In addition, cable franchises have a framework. The federal government has said this is what you can include in a cable franchise. Under the bill that was attempted to pass last session, there was no framework. So any communities could have come up with anything that they wanted to include in it, and that would have been different from community to community to community.
Follow-up?
No follow-up. Thank you for that explanation. I appreciate that.
Quick question, Ms. Wolf. A couple of years back, maybe more than a couple of years, when the Super Bowl was coming here in committee, there was big talk about 5G and hanging, I don't know, receivers or transmitters on utility poles or the sides of building. Did that just involve cell service, or was that impacting your business as well?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 5G, it is a little confusing, I agree. 5G refers to fifth generation, and that is mobile cell service. We also say it can be 5G, but it's 5 gig, and that means 5 gigabits of service. That would apply to us, but to what you're speaking about, I think that's fifth generation, and that applies to cellular service.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from members? Ms. Representative Jacobs.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Just to kind of, I guess, drill down a little bit farther on, so if you're aiming to really cover and you've stated, I guess, that the last miles that we get to are going to be as expensive as the first 88%. But what I hear from your mouth is entirely fiber optic, a tower-to-tower system like many of our rural areas are using currently. That's just off the table to you? Is that, it's got to be you've got to have a fiber optic line in the ground to all these rural locations? Is that where you're driving at?
Who wants to handle that one?
I'll let her start.
Yeah, I can start.
Ms. Wolf?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Representative. So a couple of things, I think to also clarify, what's in Minnesota law right now is you are only considered served if you have a wireline connection. So anything like fixed wireless or satellite service is not considered served. And that was passed when, the border-to-border and the Office of Broadband Development were established. In the last, my members have always done, wired connections. There are companies that do kind of mix. What I think that just has worked for our companies to do wired connections. But I will say, I think my membership and others probably agree that for some of these absolute last homes, a wired connection might not be possible, and other technologies will need to be used, whether that be fixed wireless or satellite. I think it will have to be looked at as, feasible, economical, and sustainable, that those are the things that you're going to have to, and the state through BEAD and through our other border-to-border programs are going to have to look at to reach those last homes. But likely it will take all sorts of technology to do that. And I don't know if Brent has any.
Mr. Christensen.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jacob, my members do both. They do fixed wireless, they do fiber. Fiber is the goal because once you put it in, you don't have to worry about it. You change out the electronics. It's also not affected by terrain like in your district. You've got some fixed wireless providers in your district that they provide some service, but it wouldn't be as good as if we could get fiber to them, which I think is the goal. But like Ms. Wolf said, we don't have the money to get fiber everywhere. There's going to have to be a solution somewhere where we're getting fixed wireless and then even satellite to some customers. But the goal is to get as far as we can with fiber.
Follow-up?
Yeah, maybe
Representative Jacob?
One follow-up, Representative Chair Anderson. Just to, these rural locations, many of them are just so remote that I just can't comprehend that you're going to be able to run and my county in particular, we're heavy with bluffs and, the hills are 500 feet high to try to, does the technology, the fiber technology, that's the standard into the future? That given whatever technology comes along, fiber is still what's going to handle, say 20 years from now, whatever the technology is, you want that line in the ground to every location.
Mr. Christensen?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jacob, I can tell you unequivocally yes. I'll give you an example. My family's company put in a 4 fiber line from where we live in Medelia to Mankato. We just decommissioned that a year or two ago. And back then we thought 4 fibers was going to be all we'd ever need. Now we have much bigger fiber. The thing about fiber is when you put it in the ground, you've got that connectivity. The only thing that changes and upgrades are the electronics on the end and the central office and the customer premise. And that is less expensive to change out. The electronics last probably from 5 to 10 years, but you've still got that fiber, and the lifespan of that fiber is 20, 30 years.
Okay, thank you.
Follow-up?
No.
No, okay, thanks. With that, thanks to our testifiers, very interesting again, and very important to all of Minnesota, so thank you.
Thank you.
That kind of wraps things up today, but I do want to say that we did invite the Deed Office of Broadband Management Development to present in committee. but the Walls administration declined our offer to participate in today's meeting. The Capital Projects Fund Performance Report that's in committee in your materials, in your packets, and the border-to-border broadband grant report is expected to be released any day, as it was due out on January 15th. So if no more questions, the meeting stands adjourned.